It's just that, you know, it's like taking a picture with a light behind you. It's just one.
I don't know how those go on.
Well, there's one. It's on already. And Joe can sit right there, and Uncle King.
Where did you get that?
Want to go over and sit next to you, Joe? You can sit next
Is that
to her.
on?
Yeah, it's on. You can sit next to her.
Come on.
Okay. Come on, sit right here. Doesn't matter. All right, and Joe, question, where were you born and when?
I was born in Brookline, Massachusetts, in an apartment on Beacon Street,
Yes.
October 26, 1911.
And where was my mother born?
She was born in an apartment in Brookline, 33 Dwight Street in 1918. She was born, I think.
And Uncle Dick in 1918.
Uncle Dick was born in on Crown and Shield Road in Brookline.
Oh, Crown, that's right down the street from where I lived when I was in college.
Yes, that's right.
And okay, what was your mother's maiden name?
Gertrude Cross Lobham. She was adopted by Clarence Lobham.
Okay, but she was a natural daughter of her mother.
Yes.
Okay, and where was she born? If you
Brighton, Massachusetts, I think.
Okay, about when? Do you remember?
I haven't any
It was
idea.
1884.
1884.
Okay. Your mother had a sister. What was her name?
Lillian Aldrich Cross.
And she had a different father.
Yeah, Aldrich.
Okay. And do you know she was younger? Younger than your mother?
Yes.
And do you know when she was born or where she was
No, I
born?
haven't any idea.
Okay. Now your mother's mother, your grandmother,
Yeah.
what was her name? Her maiden name, and
Her name was Josephine Ricker.
that was her maiden name, or?
That's her maiden name.
And she was married
First to
several times.
Walter Cross, who was my grandfather.
Your actual natural grandfather.
Yeah.
And then she was married.
And she was married to this Aldrich, and Lillian was born.
Okay.
And Aldrich left her with no money, and Mother remembers her mother rocking Lillian in her arms, and the rocking chair was about the only piece of furniture in the apartment, and she was destitute. And so her family, who were quite well-to-do people living in Brighton, took her in finally and helped her with her two girls. And then she married Clarence Lobham,
Uh-huh.
third
Matthew,
husband.
can I take this to bed?
And was very happy with him, I guess.
But they had no children. They had no natural children. They
No.
adopted both of the kids.
Yes, Clarence.
Okay.
She's a director, producer.
So there were just the two sisters. That's it.
That's it.
Okay. Now,
She's sitting right there.
do you know any stories about your that you can think of? I mean, it's tough for me to sit here and think of it of your mother's family. Funny stories. For instance, my mother used to talk about a chauffeur that was Dada's. Was her
Dada, yeah.
was her nickname? She used to drive you guys around or something. I don't really
I
remember.
don't remember him at all.
No, Mom
no.
did.
Was he the chauffeur for Lillian, though?
Well,
I think
No, they're not talking about that one.
because Laban was well-to-do. He was a well-to-do man, wasn't he?
oh yes.
Yeah.
Oh, Jim Savory, my grandmother's chauffeur, yes.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And my grandmother and the chauffeur used to harmonize. There was this lovely big limousine with flowers in the back, and Jim would be driving, and they'd sing all these songs.
Well, that's how my mother
together.
remembered.
Yes.
Other stories. Apparently, your grandmother was quite a character.
Well, as Mother said, she wasn't really a character. She was a victim of circumstances, and which were kind of beyond her control.
Uh-huh.
And she was kind of a sweet little woman, top heavy, but small. Like they all had 2 and 3 size shoes. And my mother wore
Yeah.
3 or 4.
I guess that's not where.
Grandmother used to topple over because she was top heavy. These little feet, she'd fall.
Now here's a story that you can tell us. My mother told a story about. You're right, Big. In Boston. Beaky, come here.
I was sitting at the door.
Yeah. Bee, come here, honey. Where's Daddy?
Right, on the spot, right?
Why don't you go find Daddy?
Bee, come here, let me see the flashlight.
about your mother walking in the
Hey,
streets of
Pete,
Boston
come
with the
over.
elastic of her underwear
Come over here and I'll
let out, and she
go on.
stepped out of her underwear in the middle of the road and kept on walking.
Don't remember that at
Oh
all.
well. It was a funny story when she told me.
I
She probably
guess.
made it up. Okay.
Well, Uncle Frank is
Come over
the
here.
funny
Oh, Uncle was
story.
Uncle Frank. Yeah, who,
Yeah.
and the packing boxes.
Yes.
Yeah, who was Uncle Frank?
Before the Uncle Frank episode,
Would you like
he
to
was,
Come on, baby.
Come
here.
my grandmother was one of 5 children. There were 4 girls. And Frank,
Good
the
girl.
Ricker family. And
And then what are you, hold it, what are you gonna do with
Uncle
that?
Frank wasn't quite with it. And when he was a boy, his father was the architect for the reservoir there outside of Boston, in
Uh-huh.
Brookline,
Right.
Chestnut Hill actually.
Where the Boston College is.
Yes, that's right. And Frank used to like to fish in it before it was a reservoir. But after it was a reservoir, he'd go out and fish every morning, and a cop would come along and tap him in the shoulder and say, "Listen, buddy, I've told you, you can't fish here." So it made Frank very mad. So he went home, and my mother remembers a dummy he made of a man with a fishing pole in his hand. And so he got the man out there one night, and he put a line attached to the man's foot and walked around to the other side of the lake or around the curve. And Frank was in the other end, and when the policeman came along, when the policeman tapped him on the shoulder and said, the dummy, said, "Hey buddy, you can't fish here," and Frank yanked the dummy, and it fell in, and it was weighted, and it fell to the bottom. And the policeman was a coward and didn't jump in after him. So there was a great stew, and the cop got fired from his job because he wasn't good at it.
Right.
Didn't
And
rescue the
save
dummy.
this guy.
So that was funny.
But didn't Frank live in packing boxes
Well,
or something?
Yeah.
Around the lake for a long time?
Well, this was up in the woods in Wayland
In Wayland.
somewhere.
Oh, in Wayland.
He had a dog, and then some animals that were burned up in the fire. Somebody set fire to the place. Everything burned up, so.
But was he your grandmother's brother?
Only brother,
Only
yeah.
brother, so it was just
Yeah.
she and Frank.
And her sisters were always called the bad aunts in our day because they weren't very good to my grandmother. And they got all the money from the Rickers.
Now, who were they? What were their names?
Aunt Belle and Aunt Agnes.
And Aunt Agnes was a maiden aunt. I remember meeting
Yeah.
her. She lived, and she actually, there was a story about her where her money got crooked away. She had a guy that she really liked, and he took the money from her or something.
Never heard that.
No, but she ended up not having any money, was being supported by somebody else in your family. Aunt Agnes?
I
No.
don't
No,
remember
Belle.
Aunt Agnes.
Belle. Agnes never had any
Oh.
friend
Aunt Belle
boyfriends
had
at
the
all.
money.
Belle had all the money.
We take what's on.
And they used to come in a great limo to visit before Christmas every year, and they'd give us nice books, but that was about the extent of it. They never gave us much
So there
else.
was your grandmother, Frank, Belle, and Agnes
And then Gertrude and Lillian,
were the next generation.
no, the same, they're sisters, they're all siblings.
There
There were 4 girls
Right.
and a boy.
I'm getting
That was the
confused. I
Ricker.
thought the Dada, who was Josephine, right?
Josephine, Gertrude, Agnes, Belle,
Frank.
Frank.
Okay. But then in the next generation, there was Gertrude and Lillian, who was your mother and her
Correct.
sister.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, but the only person that got married was your grandmother. The other, none of.
No, Belle was married a couple of times.
Oh, she was?
And the 2 that died, I don't know much about them at all.
Agnes was an old maid.
Agnes
Agnes
was the
was-
only one that didn't
She
marry.
lived to be 100 and something.
101. She was fine until she got to be 100, and then she went downhill.
Yeah, I remember. Well, I remember.
She was a nice woman.
I remember.
very
I
nice.
remember going to Boston. She lived in not a rooming house, but she had a
Yeah, it
small
was.
apartment
It
It
somewhere.
was a rooming,
It was an old
rooming
house.
An
That
old
had a-
I
house.
don't think she had a kitchen. I don't really remember.
No,
I remember she
she
had lots
ate
of pictures.
downstairs. There was a nurse, a retired nurse, owned the house and took in boarders to keep her going.
And where did
I
she
guess.
live? Where was that?
West Newton.
Wesley. So I was a small child when I remembered that. So, and their maiden name was Ricker. Do you know anything about the Mr. and Mrs. Ricker, what their name was, or which would be many generations from you? Would
Well-
be tough.
It was my great grandmother.
Yeah, that would be.
Her name was. She married a couple of times, but I really don't know what her names were. Ricker was the only
Well,
name
the
I.
thing is, you're lucky that
They had a
the
lovely
big
estate in
girls
Brighton and a lot of money.
Yeah.
because of this Mr. Ricker was the architect for the
For the reservoir there.
reservoir.
So you invite everybody else, David?
We see.
Okay. Now you said that all these people that you know of, there's some plots, and where are they buried? In Mount St. Albans? What did you say?
No, they're buried in Mount Auburn Cemetery
Mount
in
Auburn.
Cambridge, Mass, but
Okay.
not the Rickers. I don't know where they're
Who
buried.
would be buried there?
The Smiths
The Smiths.
and the Hammonds.
Who are the Hammonds?
Well, my grandmother's maiden name was Hammond.
Okay.
Martha
The
Hammond.
Smith grandmother.
Yeah.
The Smith. Okay, well, let's start with the Smith. So, what was your father's full name?
Harold Page Smith.
And where was he born? And about when was he born? If you can
Well, he was
remember?
born in Cambridge, I think, and I don't have any idea.
And what about his siblings? Who did he have as siblings?
He had a sister, Marion,
Aunt Marion.
and another sister who died, Flossie, when she was quite young.
On this date,
Okay. Do you know where they were all in Cambridge, somewhere around Boston? Obviously.
All around there, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Name of his mother, your grandmother on her father's
Martha
side.
Hammond Smith.
Okay. And the grandfather.
Grandfather was Francis Livermore Smith.
Okay. And they also were around Boston.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Everybody's around.
My grandfather really developed part of Belmont called Payson Park.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And he had a horse and buggy, and he was getting the horse and buggy out of the barn and was going out the pathway to the road, and a branch was hanging down. He went to snap it, and it snapped into his eye, and his eye ran down his cheek, and he had a glass eye, so that was exciting.
Oh my goodness.
Not for him.
Not for him.
He died, right?
Now, as far as your father's side, everybody was only married once. Were there other marriages, or just
No, Marion never married. No,
And Flossie died.
nothing very exciting.
Right.
Except for this relative who used to come out with all these sayings like, better belly bust than good victuals, boss.
Well, your father was full of those. I remember because my mother used to talk about them all the time, all these different sayings.
And talk is cheap. It takes money to buy land.
Hey, Mom.
Yes.
And
Say excuse me.
Excuse me. I'm first.
We'll talk to your dad.
what is some more?
Watch the
Kate?
cord. Watch the cord.
That's about all.
That's about it, I guess.
Well, there's other ones. Mom used to say something about the push carts. No matter, I don't know. I don't remember.
Street cars.
Street cars.
Combined just the same.
The milk
Yeah.
delivery.
Street cars are just the same.
I don't know. No matter where you sit, the man in the
SS
balcony's gonna
first,
spit.
oh.
I mean, there's
No, no,
obviously
no.
you guys like.
How about SS Pierce? Oh, not the orders to your mother.
About what, Uncle Ken?
Store, S.S. Pierce.
Famous store in Boston, SS Pierce.
They'd call up every morning while she was lying in bed. She'd give them her order for the day, and then her
Then it
butcher
would be
was
delivered.
Bucksbaum, and they'd call up.
Oh,
This
great.
is your mother?
Yeah. She had breakfast in
But
bed.
now all the-
Like
Oh, my
you said,
goodness.
area.
That's
Like
an
me.
exchange.
was covered by,
Her life
SS
changed
Pierce.
after that.
they deliver your groceries for you.
That'd be nice.
That is
Well,
nice.
that's what happened when I grew up.
Yeah.
Now,
It's a change. Now you.
tell me about the connection back through your families for relatives that are famous that I've heard about. One is Massachusetts Bay Colony.
Yes. Edward Rawson was the first secretary of Massachusetts Bay Colony, and we're directly related through Grinold Rawson, really. His brother, I guess.
And that would be through the Smith side or the
Yeah. Well, I don't know whether Smith or Hammond, but one or the
one
other.
or the other. And how about where Richard went to high school? There were lots of pages in, what was the name of the town, Rich?
Highway.
In Hardwick, lots
Yeah.
of pages, P-A-I-G, right? Is
Right.
it?
Mhm.
And they're connected through the Smiths also,
Well, through the Hammonds.
through the Hammonds.
Yeah,
It's also an old New England family.
yeah.
And Mom used to always say that your family came over on the Mayflower or soon after. No,
The ship afterwards.
the ship afterwards was very crowded.
No, I never heard that.
Next shift.
Oh, I heard that.
Next, well, 45-minute wait. Then before we went
That's
away.
right. No, I think it was very crowded, Rich. There were about 3,000 people on that
Everybody
ship.
thinks that there's a.
ship
The ship next ship over after.
Or maybe we all was
May
descended
fall.
from the same three people.
That's right.
Well, every United States, everybody's descended from the same three people. That's
Right.
Mayflower.
All right.
Sure.
Let's see. Where did your family live when you and Mom and Dick all grew up mostly?
Crown and Shield Road,
In Brookline.
Brookline. Nice big old house.
And what high school did you graduate from? And
I went to
Mom,
Brookline High and Nancy went to Newton High.
And where did Uncle Dick graduate from?
Newton High too.
Vermont Academy.
And Vermont Academy
And you went on to Catherine Gibbs,
for a couple of years, yeah.
and Mom went on to Catherine Gibbs for a little bit.
Mhm.
And Uncle Dick, where did he go to school?
Amherst.
Vermont Academy in Amherst.
In Amherst. That's right.
Everything, I didn't even know that.
Just for the record, what was the cause of death that you can remember of your parents and grandparents, just for in this day of health and that sort of thing? I know
Sure. My grandmother died, Dada died of diabetes. She had a very bad case of it. Lost her eyesight at one point.
Uh-huh.
She just died of that, really. And in those days, Dr. Jocelyn in Boston was a pioneer in the study of diabetes. And there's a hospital there in his name. And he was her doctor.
Uh-huh. That's great.
And my father died of heart problems.
Uh-huh. And so your mother died of cancer.
Yes.
And she had cancer, you said, of the uterus. But she actually died of,
Uremic poisoning.
which is complications from the treatment she had at that time.
Yeah.
Occupations. What did your dad do for a living?
Well, he was with Rice and Hutchins Shoe Company, educated shoes for 23 years, and then they liquidated. And then he went with other shoe companies. Then he worked for the government for a while. He
Yeah.
was in the Custom House Tower.
Head of the
Commerce.
Hi, Janet, how are you?
And the occupations of like your grandfather, I guess in those days women didn't work. Don't ask about your mother or your grandmother because they probably didn't work.
Didn't work.
But how about your grandfather, fathers on your mother's side, and your grandfather, one grandfather?
My grandfather Smith was the real estate developer.
Right.
And Clarence Laubum, the only grandfather I knew, was in the Payne Furniture Company in Boston.
Right. And then we
He's
have.
a rug connoisseur,
Right.
Oriental
I
rugs.
was gonna say there are still some rugs around that we all have,
Yeah.
which are beautiful that
Yeah.
he had. Okay, now a question I have about what you remember about growing up. Well, I guess it's not growing up, but actually about what your father did during Prohibition. There's a story about that he tried to make bathtub gym and blew up the house, or almost blew up the house, or is that again a
No,
story
he
that
had
my
a
mother
still in
knew?
the cellar, but it never blew up to my knowledge.
All right, well it's half right. And so my mother always told a story about fireworks too, about almost blowing up the house with fireworks. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of.
Don't remember
Don't
that.
remember
Okay,
that.
okay.
And during Prohibition,
you
what
should
did
go
your
there
father
and
do for a
talk.
living to try to support,
Huh?
not
You should
Prohibition,
talk. You should talk.
the Depression?
You should be the
What
one
did
that
your
knows.
father do to try to support the family?
Because
Delhams or something?
you know,
Was
He
that,
was in the Delham business, but I don't think that was during the Depression. It was
Oh,
after.
I thought that's what my mom said.
Well, he struggled for a while, but he worked for Rice and Hutchins King, didn't he, through the Depression?
well,
Because that was in when, 1920?
well, the Depression started in 31.
So I was through
Crash
school.
was 29. Yeah. I don't know.
come see if you guys here.
I arrived 41. By that time, he was working in the customs office.
Okay, will you go see Daddy for a minute so I finish talking to Joe? Please?
You sit with us?
Yeah, you have to be quiet though. Because we're going to talk to Aunt Joe a little bit more, okay? And then I'll let go.
We're almost through.
We are almost through. Any interesting stories about growing up with Mom or you or Dick? Anything you can think of that are funny?
No, we always had fun together. Washing the dishes, we'd all sing and
I was going to
harmonize.
say, you used to like to sing a lot.
Yeah.
How about the trip to Chicago?
Oh, after Rice and Hutchins, my father got a job out in Chicago and packed us all up. And in those days, it was quite an event to drive out there. And we started out, we lived in Brookline, and we went as far as Wellesley, and he stopped a man in the field and said, "Is this the way to Chicago?" And the man was hysterical. As we were, I don't know what else about that. It didn't work out, we didn't stay very long.
Now, a question about you. Did you not work with Jimmy Roosevelt?
Yeah.
Okay. And did you not meet President Roosevelt?
Yes, I stayed at the White House in Campobello and Hyde Park.
And also, your father met him too. I remember.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, one day at the White House, Jimmy was sick all the time. Really, most of the time I was working for him. And he was sick, and he was at the White House, and he sent for me, and I came down, and I was having breakfast there, and Mrs. Roosevelt, Eleanor, said, "I understand from Jimmy that your father's in Washington on business," which he was. And she said, "Would you like to ask him over for lunch?" And I said, well, I'm sure he'd love to come. And I wondered whether he would love to come or not, because he was a strict Republican.
Right.
Really liked FDR. But he was pleased to be asked to the White House. So he was ushered in a room where I was sitting taking dictation, and we talked for a while, and the president wheeled himself in a wheelchair and was eating grapes and spitting the seeds out in a very casual manner. And Jimmy said, "Father, I'd like you to meet Joe's father, Harold Smith." And FDR said, "Harold, nice to meet you." And my father was speeding away, and he was really taken by this man who had great personality and charm. So from then on, he was mostly a Democrat.
Well, because he got given a job
Yeah.
from the commissar club.
All right. Last question I have is, where did you and Uncle King meet, and when were you married? And where did you all live?
We met at an eggnog party in Brookline in 41.
January 1st.
January 1st.
And we'll be married 50 years next fall, in September.
Oh, wow.
So we met in, my heart went pit-a-pat when I saw him.
Now, did he not have a wasp waist, and he was
Certainly
three wolves?
did. He was. That's right.
And you lived in Boston for a while after you were married?
We lived in Newton Center first, and then we lived in Weston.
Now, what was Uncle King doing in Boston? Because he grew up in upstate New York.
He worked for A.F. Bloom Leather,
Uh-huh.
and he was transferred from the New York office to the Boston office.
That's why we-
And then he was transferred back to the New York office. That's why we moved down here.
Right, and you moved here and you didn't know anybody. I remember that story actually.
right.
And you've lived here for a lot of years now, but you didn't know anybody. Except for you said Dad introduced you to one couple or something.
Yep.
That he knew here in
He said, "You
Dartmouth.
gotta know somebody." Introduced us to the Maiders, and then on.
Yeah.
It was easier.
Can you think of anything else? I mean, those are the questions that I wrote down. They were just kind of general questions, but Lynn, do you have any
Your
questions?
father was the one that introduced us to Rumson Society.
Dad. Right.
That's right.
The old Dartmouth boys that he knew.
They came over here, your mother and father, to spend the first
New
New Year's Eve with us when we lived in a little rented house on Davis State
Say,
Railroad.
"King, you should be up here.
That's right.
So he said,
Come over here.
"No, why should I be over there?"
Because you're doing all the talking."
He can hear you. It's all right. It's going.
So, we went to a restaurant New Year's Eve, the four of us, and then we had our milk punch. I made up the milk punch New Year's Day, and he said, "Don't you know anybody around here?" He said, "Well," he said, "I went to school with a couple of friends of mine who live here, so I'll call Bill Russell." So he called Bill Russell, and there was no answer. So then he called Bob Maida. And
If you're interested in agriculture, I would suggest
finally had a hangover, and they came over and had some milk punch with us,
One more. You've had
and they introduced us to everybody, and he was responsible for us getting into the Seabright Beach Club. Period. And that was it.
Been here ever since.
And we've been here ever since. That's right.
Well, Uncle King, didn't you
And
know?
they were both fraternity brothers in the same class as your father at Dartmouth. All Chi Phi's.
Now, Uncle King, what do you remember about Dad? You always tell funny stories about Dad. I know you remember a lot about him.
Well, I always beat him playing golf.
Well, that's a good thing for you.
That was the main thing.
That was the only thing. I mean, that's the only thing worth remembering.
Well,
Being that golf.
Yeah, I remember. Oh, do I remember? Is right. We used to. He used to ask me down for the Army-Navy game
In Philadelphia?
prelude that the party was held Friday night between the Cornell-Penn game and the Army-Navy game on Saturday, and they had a big wing ding at the Racket Club in Alec Ewing.
Uh-huh.
And your father would ask me down, and I'd take the train down, and Joe would drive down during the day, and then I would take the train down at night, meet your father at the Union League Club, and we would change into a dinner jacket, and then we would go to this big football party they had at the Racket Club.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of drinking and so forth and so forth. And I remember your father and I wandered home, and I think you drove about 20 miles an hour all the way to Wallingford.
Is that the way you were leaning out the window and following the white line?
I think so, yeah.
Remember that story?
Yeah. That's it.
I
That
should
was
be
it.
saying that for these kids just about to drive. That's all right.
Don't worry about it soon enough, right?
Oh, we had a lot of fun.
21.
I remember that when you got,
That's
because
That's in the drive for a while.
must have been an early teenager. But how long ago was that when you drove 20 miles an hour home? Probably about like 1960 maybe, or
Oh, gee whiz.
probably. I would think I was like an early teenager, late child.
A late child.
I
Were you
think
a late child?
it was after you moved into the new
Oh,
house.
no, yeah, because I was 11 when we moved in, so I was probably about 13 when that happened, I think. I
Yeah.
remember the story. I was old enough to kind of understand, but I wasn't that old. I remember that following the
I
white
don't
line,
know.
Dad saying, leaning out the window, and they followed the white line.
Oh,
Chip
Make
must
sure
have
they
been
stay
away to
warm.
school
my time would change.
because we wouldn't have anybody leaving. So it must have been in the late 60s, I would say, in the middle 60s probably.
Yeah,
So,
that's right.
Well, tell about Harold meeting Bus in the bar on the Statler. That's how we brought him home for dinner. That's how we met Nancy.
Oh, yeah, let's hear that story about how she
well,
peeled
that's your
potatoes.
story, more than mine. Oh, well, that's right. And then how I met him. Let's see. Yeah, your grandfather met your father in the bar at the Statler in Boston, and he was in the Navy, and he was looking a little lonely, and Harold made conversation with your father, and they got talked together, and he said, well, I got a daughter that might like to meet you, something
So
like
he didn't
that.
know him at all before he met him? Nobody introduced him?
No,
I
they
thought
just
somebody
sat
kind of-
They sat
Just by
next to each
chance.
other at the
Oh,
bar,
oh, isn't that
and they
funny?
struck up a conversation.
Oh, isn't that
And
funny?
so Bus said, well, I take him up on this invitation. I guess Harold asked him out for dinner
Yeah.
to meet
And your mother
Nancy.
cooked all the time in the kitchen.
Didn't come out of the kitchen.
And then
Oh,
there was something about, the following weekend was the Harvard-Dartmouth game.
yeah.
And he was going to go to it, and we had season tickets. And somehow or other, Joe, I guess, couldn't go. So Nancy told Buzz that I had the ticket, and
Uh-huh.
he, being from Dartmouth and so forth, wanted to go. And so I told her to tell him that I'd meet him at a certain gate at the Harvard Stadium. And I said I would be the guy with a brown hat and the oldest looking polo coat that he could see in that vicinity.
Yeah.
So that's
Did he
how,
find you?
that's how
And he found you,
Bus and I
right?
met.
That's funny.
But you like Indiana Jones
And then Joe threw the coat away.
Well, tell
You don't
them
have
how
to go anymore?
the wedding, and I was in the hospital, and
But
after
that's
the
right,
wedding,
yeah.
Nancy and Bus came over. He was in his Navy uniform to see me, and it was very nice of them, because I was very sad not to see
In
him.
appendicitis.
She was supposed to be the maid of honor.
Yeah.
I guess
That's
that's what
right, I
you
remember
call
that.
it,
And
isn't it?
who was Mom's maid of honor when you got sick? Was there someone, or did she just?
I don't think it was. I wasn't there.
I know.
Yeah, at that point, you didn't care. You're upset and sick.
I wasn't. She was never pretty away. Oh, if I knew one, you know.
Yeah, were you in Boston still when Jay was born? Were you still all together?
Oh,
in
sure.
Boston?
Oh,
Yeah.
sure.
Both-
Your father
both
was out in
Lindsay.
the Pacific,
Right.
and we were right there waiting for the baby to be born with your mother.
Uh-huh.
She said she drove herself to the hospital.
Oh, no, she didn't. My father and I drove.
I know.
And she said that she got a house where the trash blew down the street. After Jay was born, she couldn't go back to your father's place because they didn't allow any children there. You remember that?
I didn't remember that part. I just know she has
It's
a
a house.
so she said a rundown apartment on Adams Street or.
It's in Walden or
Waltham. She
Waltham,
had a
right.
house over there.
waiting for Dad to come back from South
So she
Pacific.
wanted to be alone.
This terrible place and
Yeah, I
Dad came
don't
home and took her
remember
away
that.
from it.
Well, that's true. It wasn't the greatest, but she seemed to be upset.
Well, where did Dad work when he was in Boston?
John Hancock,
And then, well, how did he?
insurance company in the mortgage department.
And then how did he get involved with Mr. Redding? How did he get to move to Philadelphia? Do you know that story? How he?
Well, he'd been doing some mortgage business in Philadelphia before he went into the service
Uh-huh. In Philadelphia or from?
in Philadelphia.
Oh, because his mother lives in Swafford, so.
So when then after the war, and he'd married your mother and so forth, why they wanted to settle in the Boston area apparently.
My father got a job.
And so he got a job with the John Hancock Company and insurance company in the mortgage department, and they lived on the same street with the Donovans and
College Road.
College Road with what was the other name besides the Donovans that they were very friendly with?
Schuster's? You were saying, oh, I was talking
No,
about Schuster.
Oh, that was
I think
her
the,
maiden. Schuster was
Monroe's?
Monroe's.
Yeah.
That was the other one.
Well, College Road was where Lynn was born, wasn't it? Didn't you live there?
Susie
Yeah.
Hurdy lived down the street. They were
That's where you,
friends with them.
that's where you were.
Harry?
That's
Yeah,
when you were
that's
born.
right.
Then there was Nana Cook.
And then
I'll never forget walking into that house after you were born, Lynn, and your father was sitting, he was so good to you. He was screaming or something. He was patting you and so nice to you.
Yes, he used to try to feed me during the night or something, like he said, but he didn't know how to do it, so he held the bottle way over here, and I was way over here, or something like that.
And then
Laughing it up, I guess.
and then when and then Chip came along shortly after that, and your mother and Lindsay and Jay had never been christened or baptized, so the three of them, Chip and Lindsay and Jay, were all christened together at the same time at the Unitarian Church in Weston, Massachusetts.
You know, the certificate, were you?
I think we had a picture of
I
that.
was baptized when I joined the church at age 14. Well, like Sue, my kids aren't baptized yet.
Well, your aunt's never been baptized.
I never have been.
No.
She's a heathen.
Well, how about Uncle Dick? He would join the Air Force,
Oh, boy.
and he was in the Korean War. He was in Vietnam, and
Yep.
he had
Second World War.
Second World War too.
Yeah, oh, sure.
Sure.
And
Sure,
he left Amherst.
he was in the class of 1945 at Amherst.
Yeah.
And he spent his first year at Amherst, and then the war started, and I don't know whether he was drafted or enlisted or what, but he was in the Air Force, and he flew these B-17 bombers
Yeah.
as a navigator. And so after World War II, he came back and finished and got his degree at Amherst. And so he had some GI Bill of Rights money left, so he took a course in journalism at the University of Mexico. And he went back to Wallingford.
You must remember him.
You must remember that.
I
And
do.
he,
Well, Dan
he got a
was-
job with the
Nan wasn't born yet.
Chester Times. And he was monkeying around then, and along about that time, the Korean War came along, and so he was recalled, and so he spent the rest of his time in the Air Force. After the Korean War, he decided, well, what the hell, I might as well stay in. I've spent this much time in. So, so of course he was still in, and that meant that he had to serve in Vietnam. And then after Vietnam, he was in Okinawa for a while. Never had it so good there because the servants were a dime a dozen,
I
I
remember
guess.
that. I remember when he lived there, hearing the stories.
And then finally, he was transferred back to this country, and by that time he decided that he got his pension and retired.
He was in California for a while, and he
Oh,
went to
yeah.
Caribou, Maine,
Yeah.
which was
Well,
when
that
they
was
transferred from
that was his
California to
last post
Caribou.
was up in Maine,
Which is way up there.
Presque Isle.
Presque
Yeah.
Isle, yeah.
And then he came back and retired and settled in Rochester.
Wasn't there stories about him flying with a dog? Didn't you have a dog with him when he used to fly in the
Oh,
plane?
Valley, then we had this dog for many years.
But did he fly in the plane with him some or something? Was there
Could be, yeah.
I
He
don't know.
inherited the dog from a flyer who didn't come back from a mission, and so no one had.
He
wanted
shipped
the
it
dog,
back
so
to
he took
us from, and the poor dog was
Dog's
all,
almost dead.
all skin and bones when we picked him up at Boston.
Been in a crate for, I don't know how long, in a boat.
Oh, yeah, and then Dick was with the United Airlines for a while in Chicago, and he wanted O'Malley sent back to sent out to California. And I made this crate, took it down to the United Airlines, the freight, and they loaded the crate into the plane, and the dog walked right out of the crate.
Oh, no. Oh, well.
Good try.
So,
Yeah, I mean, Mrs. When they lived in Crest Lane, lot of years later, like 20 years later, the neighbor down the street said that she still had the pan O'Malley brought to her. He'd gotten from, somebody must have left a pan on their back doorstep or something, and O'Malley picked up his mouth and brought it over to her, and it was a good pan, so she kept it. And so it was like forever later, I was married and with kids or something, so she still had the pan that O'Malley had brought her, 25 years ago.
Irish set, wasn't it?
No,
it was an English,
Springer, English Springer.
English cocker,
Yeah, the black and
English
white ones.
cocker,
Yeah.
black and white.
The Irish setter was Rusty, was the dog we had when I was little. And we keep running away and took the roast beef off the table.
So we had Cindy,
It was when I was little.
the Cocker Spaniel, and Dick one time with our milk punch party, he kept feeding O'Malley the milk punch.
Oh,
Holy
no.
cow.
And that poor dog was drunker than a coodle.
And I
Amazing.
screamed at him, I said, you get this poor dog out and walk him around, sober him off. So they staggered out and wandered around.
It's amazing this dog survived all these things.
I
he went
know.
through.
Whatever happened to O'Malley? He finally
Oh, I
died. think
know.
Well, he was written
Car
up.
ran
He
over.
got hit by the
Oh,
garbage truck.
He was
He was-
asleep under the car and somebody
He was
started
written
for
up in
it.
the Springfield Republican newspaper. Had his picture and so forth. I don't know what ever happened to those clippings, but I guess we sent them back to Dick, didn't we?
I thought I remembered somebody, there was a picture of Dick and his dog flying.
On the plane, yeah, there is
Yeah.
one, I've seen that.
I don't know where I saw it.
She put him on the
So
Yeah.
now he's a grandfather.
Right.
Oh, did Joe tell you that we got a note from Richard?
Oh, no. Well, I don't know.
And we sent, she sent a little something to him for, because of his baby.
Oh, Richard Smith had a baby?
Yeah,
Oh, I didn't know that.
yeah,
R.P. Smith III.
Oh, really?
That's nice.
yeah.
Where do they live now?
South Berwick,
South
Maine,
Berwick, Maine.
Where is
which isn't very far from Rochester.
that?
And
He works in Boston, commutes.
she,
It's a long commute, isn't it?
No, it's not too terrible.
Not-
well, yes it is,
hour?
Joe. God, oh, it's more than that.
I bet it isn't. He goes
Not
by
an
bus
argument
with
on
other
tape.
people.
South of Berwick,
Yeah.
Maine.
It's
God,
like people from Philadelphia, they commute up to New York.
geez, I don't know where the hell they go.
Well, Uncle Kane, do you remember the first time you met my mother?
Yeah, I met her in Falmouth, Massachusetts.
Out in the Cape?
Yeah. She was down. She had a date with
Oh, okay.
Bob, no, Buddy Burrow.
Buddy
Oh.
Burrow,
And King was with
and I
Buddy
had
Burrow's
and
sister.
it,
Oh, this
her
is before
her
you had
her
that?
sister I'd met in New York, and she asked me to come up to the Cape
Whose sister?
to her for the
Huh?
Buddy.
weekend from
Oh, Buddy Burroughs.
from New York, and your sister was there that same weekend.
Mother.
Nancy was there. Yeah. At a party.
No, it was just a. The Burrows had a big
Oh,
house there
oh.
in Falmouth, and she'd come down with Buddy for the weekend, and I'd come from New York.
And she came
On the
home and
weekend.
she said, gee, Joe, you should see this nice guy. He'd be good for you.
And then you hadn't met him yet.
No,
And then you met him
and
later
it
on?
was good for me.
I guess
As
so.
a matter, as a matter of fact, I told little Burrow that, I don't know her name, but anyhow, it's close enough. I said, gee, what a cute girl Buddy's got there, and she said, well, wait till you meet her older sister.
Oh.
And look what happened.
You met her.
And you kept her.
She of me. She's taken care of me ever since.
But
Thank
did you
God.
know when you met Joe that Nancy was her sister, or was it a separate chance meeting, or
No, no.
you knew?
No, I had no, I don't think so.
Sure you did.
Well, maybe I did, yeah. Well, I don't know, Christ, I'd only been in
You
Boston,
came to
but,
the party with Lil.
oh, that's right, then I met you, but I didn't know where the hell,
You didn't come looking
Who's
for
Lil?
her.
I didn't know
This
you were,
little girl that.
Oh,
I didn't know you were Nancy's sister.
Come
Until,
on, Nancy, you wanna interview me? I mean,
until we went back to your house
Get out of the way.
afterwards, I guess. Maybe Nancy was there then.
Matthew.
I'm
Matt.
Must have come somehow or other.
Why don't you tie your shoe up?
should we interview Bruno?
Yeah, why
No.
not?
She'll do that.
I have a whole other reel, should I put it on the Italian, the bacala film, this is the bacala film.
Not just, no.
Hey, Joe Gavane.
Interview me properly.
The bunny is.
I've exhausted the Norris, I've interviewed them for 46 minutes.
Oh, you have?
What is your name?
My name is Richard Page Smith. What am I supposed to look at, the camera?
You can look at anyone.
Okay.
When were you born?
I was born on the 27th of June, 1922.
And where did you go to school, and where did you live for the most part of your younger life with your parents?
I was born in Brookline, Mass, and I went to the Brookline schools till I was 10. Then I moved to Woburn, Newton, Mass, and I went to the Newton schools and graduated from high school in 1939. And then I went to Vermont Academy in Vermont, which is a good place to send a kid if you don't want to go somewhere nice, for a year. And then I went to Amherst College for 2 years, and then I got called up in the service in the war. So that's about the end of the educational part of it.
And you were in the Air Force for how many years?
Not in the Air Force. I went in the Army. I volunteered in September 1942. I mainly volunteered so that I could get another semester in before I get called up. I got called up in March 1943, and I was in the Army as I went to basic training, and I went to water purification. I was going to be a water purification expert. But then I got into cadets and went to pilot school, and I got as far as 120 hours solo time, and then I washed out. And I said, at the time I washed out, I said, Dick, never look back and say what a wonderful time you had being a pilot, because you didn't, and I didn't. I was glad to get out. It was very nerve-wracking. I got out just before they started nighttime flying. I was bad enough in the daytime. I didn't have anything to do in the night. Anyway, then I went to navigation school, and I got out of the World War II. I went through that. I got an 8th Air Force, and I flew 27 missions out of England. And then the war was over. And I got out of the service in 1946. Went back to Amherst and finished the last 2 years. And then I went back in Korea. I volunteered to go back in Korea in October 51. And then I stayed in all the time from then on up until I got out and retired after 28 years commission service in 1979.
Wasn't there a time though that you worked for a paper around Philadelphia, didn't you?
Sure did. The Chester Times.
I'm the one that's old.
Yes. I was selling classified ads. It wasn't very exciting life, but they were nice people. When I first got out of the service, I went out to California right after I graduated in 1948. And I worked for United Airlines out there as a reservations clerk for a couple of years. And then I went to UCLA and through postgraduate work. And then I went down to Mexico City and went to Mexico City College for a semester in the summertime. Then I decided I was having too good a time out in California, so I should go back to the cold, frigid East, so I didn't. So that's when I ended up at the Chester Times.
When you were in the service too, didn't you go over to Vietnam for a while? Weren't you in Vietnam?
Yeah, I was in Europe during the war, and I was in Korea in the Korean War, and I went to Vietnam for a year. I was in intelligence then. I worked in Saigon and Ben Hoa. It was very interesting. It was very. I figured I was doing more in that year in Vietnam in my career and my chosen field than I did in all the rest of them, combat and everything else. It was very interesting. I was my own boss, so to speak. And I worked for and with the Vietnamese. I wasn't working altogether for the U.S. Air Force. I was working for them. I was an advisor at the time. They didn't have American forces there in '64. So I was an advisor working with them. Wonderful people, Vietnamese.
Are they?
It's a shame.
Yeah. Okay, back to our family. Let's see. What was your father's name?
Harold Page Smith.
And what was your mother's name?
Gertrude Agnes Lobham Smith.
And you had two sisters. What were their names?
If you don't know now, you never will. Josephine Smith and Nancy Smith.
Okay. Let's talk about your father's family. Harold. Who was Harold's? Did he have brothers and sisters?
He had one sister, Marion Smith. And he had another one, Flossie. Josephine has that picture, you know, that oil painting of that girl.
Yeah.
That's Flossie, his sister. My father's sister.
So he had two sisters.
Yeah, but one of them, she died. Right after that picture was taken. Painted.
So
She was
she
about 7 or 8 when she died.
And Marion never married, right?
No.
So just your father was married. And where were they from? What part of the country did that family grow up in?
Outside of Boston, Alston, Cambridge.
Okay. that sounds
Brighton.
like Boston. Who were your father's parents? Do you know their names?
Francis Livermore Smith and Martha and Hammonds. Yeah, Martha and Hammond Smith.
Okay. Okay. I don't know. Okay, just questions. What do you remember from that side of the family? Can you think of any funny
Which
stories?
side?
Your father's side, that whole,
No,
as far as,
I never knew my grandfather.
You never knew your
before I was born. My grandmother lived to be 96 or 7.
uh-huh.
And of course, Marion was fluctuating around apartment to apartment. That's a funny story about my grandmother. She was about 90. She called up my father and she said, "Harold, I don't feel well." And she was a great teetotaler. And my father jokingly said, Mother, you should try some whiskey. It'll make you feel much better. Your aches will go away. And she said, "Harold, I will never try whiskey." And he said, "Well, I'll send you a small bottle from Mrs. Pierce, and you can see if you like it." And a little while later, she called back and said, "Harold, I do feel much better. Would you send another bottle, please?"
I like that story.
And she, poor woman, when she was 90-some, she broke her hip. And at those days, they couldn't set them again and put steel in. You got a woman that old or a man that old, they'd die. Anyway, she was in a nursing home, and she called my father up and said, "Harold, you've got to get me out of this place." And he says, "Why, Mother?" He says, "It's all full of old people."
Everybody's complaining. That's great. So you never knew your grandfather, and
No.
Marion, do you remember anything about her? Did she live around where you live?
She always lived, she never got out of the Boston area.
Uh-huh.
As I say, she lived by herself in apartments. She worked in welfare work near the end of her career. I think, as a matter of fact, she worked probably 20 or 30 years in welfare, helping people and so forth. So. But I didn't get to know her until, she was as old as my father. So.
Yeah. Well, in those days, who would support her? Was she making?
Well, she supported herself because
Okay.
she was working for the welfare agencies to
Uh-huh.
help
Oh, I see.
people. Yeah.
And you also mentioned that she was a religious affiliation. What did you say once? That she was.
Well, it's sort of like a cult, because I am. There was one run to somebody out from California who started it. And, she believed in it. She practiced it, whatever they tell her to practice, she did it.
Also, your father's family, if you trace back into like ancestor realm, way back, they're the people that are related to the Pages and the Hammonds in New England.
you know, and the Rawsons,
and the Rawsons.
and the President Taft, who comes from the Rawsons too.
Oh, does he? I didn't know that.
So you're a relative, a relation or an ancestress of President Taft.
And you also mentioned the guy, who was the Massachusetts Bay Colony?
That was Rawson, Edward Rawson.
And we're all related to him too through,
Right.
we're all related to them through the Smiths.
Yeah.
Okay, let's switch and go to your mother's family, Gertrude's family.
Don't know very much.
Well,
I don't know I know my grandmother, but not my grandfather.
Well, let's see, who was, let's go back and, so we can figure out who everybody was. Your mother was Gertrude, and what was your grandmother's name on your mother's side?
Agnes, no, Josephine.
Josephine. And did she had sisters too, didn't she?
She had two sisters, Carolyn and Agnes.
Okay,
Ricka, the name was.
Ricker,
Yeah.
okay. And let's see, this is where it gets confusing. I remember when I talked to Aunt Jo, she was married your grandmother, your mother's mother was married several times.
Three.
Was it 3 times. Who was her first husband? I don't know.
Lillian's father.
Was Lillian older than?
No, I guess it was my You're getting me.
I
I'm
don't
confused
know.
because Josephine's confused too.
Well, it's confusing because you got
Anyway, I think my mother was older than Lillian's her sister. Anyway,
I think your mother was older.
okay,
than
that was George Cross was her.
So he probably was
father.
husband number 1.
And whoever Lillian's father was, I don't know.
And
Because as I told you earlier, I never knew that they were half sisters.
Okay, so yeah, there was Cross, and I don't remember the second one, and then the final husband
It was
was
Lobbam.
Lobbam, and they never had any children,
Never
although
had any children.
he raised the 2 girls and adopted them, I think,
He was a
didn't
good
he?
husband. Struck me even as a boy as being kind of boring.
It was kind of boring.
He sold furniture and he was very...
Was he the rug dealer? There were some of the Oriental rugs that are around?
Well, he worked for Payne Furniture Company,
Uh-huh.
so
I thought it was Crosses.
he could have sold rugs, I guess.
No, I don't know. Well, tell me the story again. You just told me about your father meeting your real grandfather, Cross, when he was on a sales trip out west.
Yeah. You want to hear that again?
Yeah,
For the
so it's on
record?
the tape.
My father was in, I don't know, Arizona. My sister Josephine said she never heard this story, but I did from somebody. And he was in a bar in a hotel, and this fella came up to him and said, "Hello there, Harold, how are you?" And my father, being a salesman, pretended he knew who it was. He said, "Oh, how are you?" And the fella said, "You don't know me, do you, Harold?" And my father said, "Oh, yes, I can't quite place you, but I do know you." And he said, "Harold, I'm your father-in-law, George Cross. How are you?"
That's funny. Now,
What's that? It's a raid.
here's a question too. There was a relative that my mother talked about, and I don't know which side of the family it's from or whether actually it's a true story. As we find out that a lot of these stories, I think, were fabricated over a couple of martinis, and my mother thought that they were funny. But there was a relative that supposedly lived in packing boxes on Walden Pond. Do you remember any sort of...
Packing box.
Oh,
Walden
he was a
Pond.
hermit.
Yeah,
That's
somebody.
That's Frank Ricker.
Yeah, the
He's
hermit.
an uncle,
And which
a
side?
great uncle on my grandmother's Lobbam side.
Lobbam, so on your mother's
He
side.
was her brother,
Okay,
Frank Ricker.
okay.
And he was as I understand, he's a fairly well-to-do person. He'd married somebody else, and they had 2 or 3 kids, and everything was going fine. One day he just said, "I'm out of here." He says, "I'm going to live in the woods." But it wasn't Walden Pond, and it wasn't Packing Box.
That's what they said, wasn't
It was in Weston, Mass.
Dick used to go as a child to
Oh,
visit
yeah,
him.
we used
What
to.
did he live in?
He was living in it wasn't a packing, but it was a room about this big,
Oh, just like
a shack.
Yeah, shack, yeah.
And he was very glamorous to me because it would smell like wood smoke. That's all he had to eat and cook by, and had these old guns and these old posters on the wall. He was happy as a clam because he had escaped the rat race and he had gone back to the woods, which makes him Walden-ish, but it wasn't Walden Pond.
Oh, see, that's how the stories go.
And you remember? Any of you remember where Josephine used to live in Weston? I guess that's before your
Well, you
time.
might have.
When they were
I know she
children.
lived there, but I don't.
Yeah, but it's right over
Yeah.
the Newton border,
Uh-huh.
and Frank lived a little beyond that, about a couple of miles. But nice old man.
Yeah, but he had a family too, but he left.
Yeah, but I
he-
never met his family, but he didn't disown him or anything. I guess they came to see him once
Is
in
it
a
like
while, but he just moved
They
out.
were disowned.
He disowned him. And was he a writer? What did he do when he was sitting in his jack with
I think he
the
just got
guns and the wood
got
smoke?
older and dirty, yeah.
Had a lot of cookies.
Did he make moonshine or something?
I don't know.
No.
But he was a nice man. I liked him.
Do you remember Agnes at all? Aunt Agnes?
Oh,
I mean,
yes.
she was,
Oh,
I'm
yes.
never going to
Elizabeth
see her.
I saw her. Oh, you're not going to take that picture. Oh,
Go ahead.
no. I saw her on her 100th birthday,
Uh-huh.
and Dick and I and two of the children at the time went to visit her and took her roses and things. And she'd had a telegram from President Johnson.
Oh my goodness.
She was such a fine lady, all her faculties, and she had pictures of all the family. I wonder where they all went to. Where did all the pictures go?
I remember visiting her. She lived in like a house
A
in
house.
Boston, and she had a room. And,
Yes, and all the ladies would be in the downstairs and
Right.
they'd greet you. Yes, it's the same place. And that's where she fell and hurt her hip, wasn't it, Dick? She fell outside. She used to like to go outside walking, and the leaves at the fall,
Oh.
and it was wet, and she fell there. She was a most interesting woman,
Yeah.
very, and she gave me a book. She had traveled to Scotland, and she gave me this book. I think one of the children have it now. It was all about Scotland,
I have a book of hers.
and she was such
Peebles,
a
Scotland.
nice woman.
And when I was over in England, I went up to Scotland.
Yes.
Speaking of Aunt Agnes, I went up to Scotland, Edinburgh, I think it was, and I asked them if they knew where Peebles was. And they said, oh yes, a small town outside. I never got to it, but my people are from Peebles.
Now we were in Canada. How
Yeah, and
about
I tried to get, when I was going to England in the war, I asked Aunt Agnes if she could get me a Ricker plaid scarf so I could wear it when I was flying. And she said, well, I don't have one of those. Ever since then, I was trying to get a Ricker plaid. There doesn't seem to be any such thing as a Ricker plaid.
we went in this Scottish store in Canada,
In St. Andrews.
and St. Andrews, and he said, do you have my family plaid here? And he said, what is it? The Ricker plaid. No. She went through this great book. He said, there's bound to be one, I know. It probably wasn't printed in that book. But she really said, no. And of course, on the way up, Dick says, she doesn't know what she's talking about.
The one story I sent you to was about Agnes falling in love with some man and took her money away.
Oh yeah.
So that was
Didn't
a-
Agnes at some point? I mean, the reason I guess that she never got married is that she was going to marry a guy, and he invested money for her. She had a little bit of money, and he disappeared with the money, and that was the end of the romance, the end of her money, and then she was basically supported by her sister Josephine for most of her life.
Oh.
No.
No.
The three sisters, we called Agnes and Belle. Belle and Carolyn.
Yeah.
No, Carolyn was about Who are they now?
They had some half sister. When Belle was.
It gets really.
And it gets
I
There's
just
two
told you
Lilians. Wasn't there?
Anyway, there were
Josephine
three sisters,
Yeah.
and the two of them that wasn't.
Lillian
wasn't,
and Agnes.
Hmm?
Was it Lillian and Agnes?
No, Lillian.
No.
Belle was a bad aunt. I remember that.
Yeah, Belle was bad.
One of them. There was another one. I don't remember. What.
Yeah. Well, anyway, they were called the bad aunts when I was growing up because they didn't approve of the way my grandmother was living her life, being married 3 times in those days.
Yeah.
So they more or less cut her out cold. And matter of fact, the house I was born, I just found out from Joe that she used to live upstairs.
Agnes.
My
did?
grandmother. No.
Oh no, Josephine.
Joe. And she used to live upstairs there by herself between husbands and so forth. So anyway, they were known as the wicked aunts. And what was the original question?
We were talking about
Agnes's
Agnes and
money was taken by
whether
some-
she had some
Oh,
money
no.
and it was taken and by a
Poor,
suitor.
my grandmother was not taking care of anybody except herself. She had so, and in fact, the other 2 aunts gave her a little bit of my sisters. They gave her a little bit of money, but not
Agnes.
very much, yeah.
Well,
Belle
your
and Agnes.
grandmother Josephine though turned out all right because after she married her last husband, he had a bit of money because he had that big house in Andover on Hidden Road. That was
No,
a,
you're a generation on.
oh, all right. I'm
That's their
confused.
daughter.
See, an apartment, lot of them, nice apartments around Boston, 2 of them anyhow, I know.
Yeah,
But Lillian, Josephine's daughter,
right.
married Lewis and had the big house out in
Oh,
Andover.
okay.
That's
That, all right. That's
isn't
it.
it?
I know,
I
it's
see.
cute.
But her mother, she, okay.
She's always so pleasant.
All right.
What a boo-boo.
All right, Florodora girls. Just for the record, there were Florodora girls, right?
Well, I got
I've got
a
the picture.
picture.
Oh, you have the picture.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, get the picture.
The one that was on your bureau.
Yeah, the
With
one.
I've seen it with
And
the
there's one
clothes
of your
and-
father as a little boy.
No, well, maybe it's, I don't know if it's there or not. All I have is a picture of my sister and my mother and a friend of hers in big flowery hats.
Right.
So that doesn't
Do
make
you not know what the Florodora girls are?
I think they just called themselves that just for fun.
But they had some sort of dance routine or something.
This
Yeah, but I
one?
think it was just for fun, though, wasn't it?
Yeah.
There they are.
Yeah, that's the picture that I've seen.
But that's all I know about the Florodora girls.
And this is your grandfather's
Oh, I
snack.
haven't seen that before.
And this is one of him as a boy. Isn't that something?
Oh, that's great.
I think that's wonderful. You know, Dick, we have got a lot of old pictures of
Dead people.
your mother, and there are huge albums of them. We should go through them and let these girls
Oh
have
boy,
some.
yeah. These.
All
Would-
a lot
She has more
Of-
pictures
of,
my mother had taken out.
All your family.
Oh, she took about her family and herself and.
Well, just a
They were
life
old,
of the life of.
but,
How did Mom get the job modeling shoes? Father Brown.
well,
Well, my father was in the shoe business, and I guess he said, I got a daughter that, all I've ever seen is the one ad with her in a pair of shoes.
smiling. Oh, it's beautiful.
I was gonna have it framed, that was the whole thing.
We took the picture.
And I took the I found it again after a long time. It's a page out of an advertising manual. And I was gonna have it framed, and it was on my bureau, and I think I must have been cleaning off something off the bureau. It must have fallen
And I
in the
don't know what
wastebasket
happened to
after
it.
all these years. I haven't found it again anyhow.
I have it's not an ad, but I have a picture where she has a coat on and these little button-down shoes, and she's
Yeah,
smiling.
we still have a picture like that somewhere.
Yeah, she's a little girl.
But
Yeah, she's
this was
little.
probably the same picture, but it was in the
It was actually the
in
one
the
that
ad
was in the ad.
saying buy Buster Brown shoes and so forth.
Yeah.
That one of her in the mink coat here.
Uh-huh.
You saw that one?
Yes, yes.
That's a good picture, isn't it?
Yeah, that is a good picture.
Really good.
All right.
You've hardly touched my illustrious.
Well, just talk. I don't know any more questions. I mean, it confuses me because there were 2 Lillians and
Yeah.
we were married a lot, and I'm still really
I
two
don't
months
know.
on
You're
straight.
doing well on the relatives. I don't know anything about the relatives.
Funny stories about. How about some funny stories about my mother? You must be able to remember some funny stories about my mother.
Funny story.
What about what? I've only heard this. What about the story about her and her girlfriend being picked up by these 2 priests?
Oh wait, I heard that one a little bit. I forget what happened.
Go ahead, tell her.
Do you know?
I don't remember. I don't. You told me this, dear. So I think you should tell.
I don't remember it. Go ahead.
Well, they were on in a park somewhere. Her and a girlfriend.
Betty Rice.
See, you do remember. Tell it,
I
dear.
don't remember any of the details. Of
Well, you told me that the 2 fellows tried to pick them up and they were priests. And she said she'd never believe a Catholic priest would do something like that. At the time she told me too, and I said, of course being raised as a Catholic, I said, I don't think a Catholic priest would do that. She said, well they were. And I said, okay. Yeah. But
I'll tell a story about when she was going to get married and didn't.
Oh yeah, let's hear about what I grew
Tom
up with.
McCutcheon?
Tom McCutcheon.
Yeah. The Tom McCutcheon, and we got ready. This is after the war, and we got ready for the wedding, and my father was making all these preparations. And
Oh, actually, you got that far. I
it
never
wasn't.
knew.
It wasn't. It was before the war started.
oh, maybe it
No,
was.
it was 1944ish because Jay Latimer was born in 1945.
Well, I was before that. Anyway, it was before Bus got into the picture
Well, they
at all.
got married in June of '44.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
this was
I knew that.
probably 42, 41, somewhere around there. Anyway, She was enamored on vice versa with this guy named Tom McCutcheon.
Right.
A very nice fellow. And anyway, my father bought this case of rum, this small, he got these, a bargain on it, so they were pint bottles of rum. And we're going to put those are going to be put in the punch for the wedding reception. And, and then they broke up.
Yeah.
So my sister was a little desolate and I'm at loose ends. So every afternoon we used to open a pint of the rum. And Crystal Springs rum, very nice rum. And so my father would come home from work and there's his son and daughter lolling all over the furniture and nothing to eat on. He finally took it all back away and so we have to come back to earth.
There's also a story about your father used to like to set off fireworks for the 4th of July. Your mom told a story
Oh,
once
I
when
did
the whole,
that.
you did, the whole box went
Yeah,
off.
I did that.
You did it.
Oh yeah, they had them all set up for the, and I lit the first little firecracker and I lit it and I leaned back and I put the punk into the rest of the fireworks.
And they all,
So very, very quick but spectacular display. Didn't last very long.
yeah. And there's also a story, I guess it was during Prohibition when your father was trying to make gin in the basement or something and almost
yeah.
blew up the house.
Oh no, that was
See, they got gin.
that was the root beer. He used to make gin, but this was root beer he made, I remember. And it was in the cellar and it all carbonated up and the bottles were blowing up and the corks were flying all over the place. It was really busy. My father used to get grain alcohol during Prohibition. And then he'd get a little vial, about as big as my finger, and juniper spirits or something. And then
Yeah.
he'd mix them up together and then put some lemon peel in and they drink it. I don't know how, but they did.
I guess we have to.
She's in a security building.